Yeah. Okay. Terrific. This is one of the great Parshiot Toldot. There's so much to say that really had a very it was very difficult to choose a topic to talk about in this parsha because there is so much to say. It's one of the real fundamental parshiot because we're talking about really the beginning of Jewish history and the Jewish people that really begins with Yaakov. Although Abraham is instrumental and Yitzchak, but as we know, we are Bnei Israel, or which is Yaakov's other name. We'll talk about that sometime, why he had two names. His name wasn't changed. There were people who changed their names in the Torah. Avram changes to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah. So Jews have been changing their name for a long time, even when it wasn't out of anti-Semitism. But Yaakov doesn't change his name. He adds a name, and that's another story for another time. So how did I decide on this subject, talking about the battle over the Bechora? Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that you always look at when you're trying to figure out what is most important, and sometimes when you're hit over the head time after time after time with a certain word, that's the Torah is telling you, kind of encrypting in the parsha what's most important. And you may not believe it, but in this one parak, the 27th parak, Chav Zayin, and maybe one or two psukim further, one word or a form of it is repeated 25 times. It's quite amazing. And that word is either bracha or baruch. And if you don't believe me, you can count it up later. Don't do it now because it'll make it hard to listen. But if you count up, you'll see, 25 times the same word is being repeated over and over. So something out there, someone out there is telling us this is what we should be focusing on. There's something very crucial about the bracha. I also want to say that it's very fascinating that the two words that we're focusing on are baruch, or bracha, and bechor, firstborn. Did you ever notice that the letters of bechor spell out baruch if you unscramble them? So there is a connection, and we'll come to that a little bit later. So I want to talk about the issue of this famous battle over the bracha and the bechora, of being the firstborn and getting the most special blessing, and try to figure out what's going on here in this very fundamental story of Yaakov and Esav. So first of all, a few general words about words. Words have power. Words have a certain energy all of their own, because words create reality. We believe that the world was created. We read in Bereshit that the world was created through speech, through words. God said it and it became reality, right? God says, let there be light, Vayihi or, and there was light. God says, let human beings be created, and human beings are created. So we're not talking about anything. There's no other process going on. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into creation, but it seems to stem from words. God says it, and it becomes reality. And therefore, we accept in our ongoing life that words have a power, and words create reality. So when you say something in Jewish life, that binds you. Okay, somebody's saying they can't hear me. Are you all hearing me? Okay, thank you. Okay, you may want to check your volume level, but I'll speak a little louder. So when we say something, that automatically binds us. That is already a covenant. And yes, it's good to have a written contract, and it's important to have witnesses. But when we say something, that automatically, you would say, it ties us to something. We, at a wedding, the key moment is the giving of the ring and the declaration of saying Harayat Mikudeshet. And there's 100 different examples of this. And we are held accountable for our words. You make a vow, you make a pledge, that becomes reality, and you have to keep it, or you have to find a way to be released from that pledge. Even if you didn't sign anything, you just said something. So that's why I suggest that the Hebrew for word is milah. And it also obviously connects to Brit Milah. It's a covenant. It's not exactly circumcision, but it's a covenant that you make, a promise, a treaty, an agreement every time you say something. So words have power. And then there is a special added quality to a bracha. These are also words. And sometimes people will say, well, it's actions that we care about, not words. But in Judaism, we don't agree with that. Actions are important, but so are words. So we have this tradition that we are always giving brachot. We are blessing people, not because we just want to be nice and friendly, but because this actually has an effect. There was a study done that people who are ill tend to recover faster and more completely when someone is praying for them or saying a bracha for them. And even if they don't know about it, this is a crazy study, that even if they didn't know people were saying it, but later on they found out, and there was a study done by Duke University that somehow these people got better because someone was praying for them. We have a long tradition of giving brachot, and we say it all the time, right? We wish people Boker Tov, have a good morning. It's a blessing. Lech l'shalom, go in peace. Tia bari, be matzliach, tatzliach. Even you have a welcome mat. The word welcome, it means come and be well. You should enter this house or this place in health. Welcome. In kind of old English. And then we often have this idea of asking people for brachot. And you see this, of course, with sometimes you go up to a pious person, maybe certainly in Hasidic terms, always the Rebbe wanting to receive a bracha. You see it at a brit where the sandak, by tradition, he can give out brachot. He suddenly is elevated because he's a sandak to, somebody very important. And he's now been part of this great mitzvah of welcoming this new person into the Jewish fold. So people line up to get a bracha from him. What is the dynamic here? And I wrote a little bit about this in the Parsha sheet, that essentially, although we don't control God, and we don't have a lock on God, we can use whatever influence we have to, especially on behalf of others, to say to Hashem, help this person out. And usually when we do it for someone else, it's more effective than when we do it for ourselves. That's why we say when you pray or you say a mishaberach for someone to get well, it's helpful for you, because by doing a mitzvah and showing your love for someone else and wishing them to heal, to get better, so Hashem says, wow, you're really a special person to do that, and it works in your favor. So we do have this tradition of seeking out brachot. And by the way, the Gemara says you don't have to go to some famous rabbi to receive a bracha. The Gemara says, Al tezalzel birkat hedyot. Don't underestimate anyone's bracha. because everybody has merit and everybody has a certain influence, you might say, with God. And not only that, you yourself can give a bracha. Because how do we know that? Because we bless God all the time. So you certainly, no one can say, oh, wow, who are you to give this person a bracha? They're so much greater than you. But we give Hashem brachot. The tradition is 100 brachot every day. So we say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech olam. You say, Borei pri ha'etz. He created this fruit, and we are blessing God in effect. That's both showing gratitude, but it's also this kind of partnership we have. He blesses us, we bless him. And so the blessings are it's a fantastic dynamic at work here, where we are invoking God's help, let's say, or God's benevolence by using whatever influence we might have. So giving brachot is, I think, an ancient tradition that's a beautiful tradition, and using the power of words for something very positive and beneficial. So that's the backdrop to this story of Yaakov and Esav seeking Yitzchak's bracha. And a father's blessing, a parent's blessing, but maybe in a sense, a father's blessing is very special and potent because it's signifying, in a sense, the passing of the torch, that God is giving his seal of approval, and we say this, to seek his blessing. I don't want to, when you get married, you go to seek the blessing of the parents before you marry someone, although you might have to do it anyway, but you prefer to have the blessing of the parents so that you become the next link in the chain. And that's what I think is happening here, that Yaakov and Esav, they not only want their father's approval and their father's love for them expressed by a blessing, but it's signifying who is next to take up the reins of leadership. And that's this connection between Baruch and Bechor, that the firstborn blessing, the blessing to the firstborn, is a statement that says, you are worthy of continuing my tradition. So they both are seeking Yitzchak's blessing. And the story is a fascinating one that is deeper than we're going to go into today, because Rivka's involvement in the story and her influence so that the right person gets the right bracha. But it begins with Yitzchak saying to Esav, of course, Esav is the firstborn, so Yitzchak fully expects to give him the better bracha, and we'll talk in a moment about what constitutes a better bracha. And he tells him to go out and hunt and bring him a steak. Yitzchak apparently was a lover of fine food, and because Esav was a hunter, so he has the ability, even today, we recognize that there is something very special about a meat meal. Ein simcha ela bebasar v'yayin, we say, that the chagim, unless you're a vegan or have a problem with eating meat, that's what constitutes a sense of joy over a good meat meal. So it's everybody asks the question, what was the point of saying, Yitzchak saying, before I bless you, bring me a good steak, maybe put on some onions and some good side dishes, and after I eat that, I'm going to give you a bracha. So there are a number of opinions as to why he did that. One of them is that the bracha should always be given out of a environment and a feeling of joy. And this is what brings joy to people. They have a good meal, and he's going to finish the meal and bless his son. The other idea is maybe to give a sense of self-esteem to Esav, because he's very good at this. And so if he'll bring his father a really good meal, then he'll see the contentment of Yitzchak, that this will give him the feeling that, wow, I did something good today, and I feel good about myself, and that will be part of the bracha. Not to mention the fact that we say Esav had two primary mitzvot that Yaakov was jealous of. One was that Esav never left Israel, and the second is that he excelled in the mitzvah of kibud av, of honoring his father. The Gemara says no one in history ever honored their parent more than Esav did. And some people want to be a little bit cynical and say that it was done really just to curry favor with him. It wasn't sincere, but other people say, the Gemara says, no, it was very sincere. He had that good merit. So here, by bringing him a steak, he is again exemplifying this kibud av and earning that bracha, so to speak. And we know what happens, that while he's out hunting, so Rivka, who had anticipated this whole event, she was wherever in the kitchen making this meal, so that while Esav was away, Yaakov, disguised as Esav, would bring him this meal and earn the bracha. Now, there's a whole discussion, which and it's an important question. We don't really have time to go into it. What you can really accomplish when you gain something by subterfuge, and literally by pulling the wool over Yitzchak's eyes, and how can that effect a positive bracha for you? Ein mitzvah lidei avera. You can't accomplish something good by doing it through insidious measures. But leaving that aside for a moment, at the end of the day, we see that Yitzchak, although he was in a sense tricked to give the first bracha to Yaakov, I think he understands in the end that this was the way it was meant to be. So I want to focus for a moment on what was that bracha that they were fighting over. Again, we said that it is important. It's not just simply meaningless words. These are words that have power behind them. So what exactly was the bracha? So the bracha that's given it's given to Yaakov, because Yitzchak believes that he's Esav, and he says to him as follows: Vayitein lecha Elokim mital hashamayim umishmanei haaretz, that God should give you the dew of heaven and the fat of the land. V'rov dagan v'tirosh, he throws in abundant grain and wine, etc. And that's the bracha. There's a little bit more to it, that you will be a premier nation, the other nations will bow down to you. But this is, and those who curse you will be cursed, those who bless you will be blessed. This is exactly what God had promised his bracha to Avraham. We'll talk about that in a moment again, because it's going to be repeated. That's the essential bracha. Tal shamayim mishmanei haaretz, the dew of heaven and the fat of the land. Now, when Esav discovers what has happened and says, Father, don't you have a bracha for me too? Did you only have one bracha in your arsenal? Can't you give me one? And then Yitzchak gives him a bracha. What bracha does he give to Esav? We find this later in the 39th pasuk of the 27th chapter. Hinei mishmanei haaretz yeh moshavecha. The fat of the land will be essentially your dwelling. Umital shamayim me'al, and the dew of heaven from above. Well, something is really, really crazy here, because they're fighting over the bracha, and they seem to be getting the same exact bracha. What is Tal Shamayim? Tal Shamayim is spiritual greatness, that which comes from heaven. Shmanei haaretz, fat of the land, is material wealth or material prosperity. And they're both getting the same thing. There are other things thrown in there, but this is the essential part of the blessing. So what are they fighting about if they're both getting the same thing? Well, if you read it carefully, you see the answer. That yes, they're getting the same components, but they're in a different order. This first bracha mentions Tal HaShamayim before Shmanei Haaretz. It mentions spiritual greatness before physical or material prosperity. And the second bracha has the reverse order. And that's essentially what this fight is all about. Who is going to be the spiritual leader and who is going to be the one with a greater command of material wealth? Both are important. You can be wealthy and also spiritually great. You can be spiritually great and also be wealthy. They're not mutually exclusive. The question is, where are the priorities and what is your greatest strength? And in this, perhaps Rivka, knowing what this bracha was going to be, she understood that Yaakov is the one most suited to be the spiritual leader and Esav to be the one who excels in material pursuits. And Yaakov feels this as well and understands it. And it may seem almost insignificant if they're both getting the same bracha, but the bracha represents what is my focus going to be? What is my primary pursuit, my primary goal, my primary occupation going to be? And it's kind of unusual to think that Esav would get this bracha of spiritual leadership because that really wasn't what he was all about. And Rivka understood that. Yitzchak, of course, he believes that if you have to choose between the two, the greatest bracha is to be great in terms of closeness to God and religious spirit, more so than being wealthy. But Rivka understands who is suited for what. And I think the message that's being sent here is that Yaakov, as he represents the Jewish people, is meant to excel, can be great in every single aspect, can be great in sports and great in commerce, but our primary pursuit is in spirituality. And the other nations of the world, they can also be spiritual. It's not to say that they can't have a relationship with God, but that's not their primary mission and occupation, you might say. And I think we have to, in a sense, check ourselves, and we have to ask, are we fulfilling and living up to that bracha? Are the Jewish people, we do, everybody, when you mention the word Jew, they think, oh, they're rich. They are most skilled at making money. And we have that skill, but that can't be our raison d'etre, a reason for living. We have to lead the world in spirituality, not lead the world in a material way. Yes, we contribute to that. And, we have many Jews who are head of the Federal Reserve. We saw that in America, right, with Stanley Fisher, and then he comes here. And obviously, we excel in that, but that shouldn't be our primary goal and our primary pursuit. The nations of the world also have to come close to God, but they have their own job to do, and they have their own mission, and it's not our mission. And that's why I suggested it. And then after all of this is said and done, so Yitzchak kind of puts the final touch on it, and he says to, before Yaakov runs away to escape the wrath of Esav, the pasuk says, "Vayitein lecha et birkat Abraham." He says, "May God give you the blessing of Abraham to you and your children and the rest of the generations." You have the bracha of Abraham. What was the bracha of Abraham, who also, by the way, was wealthy? But his bracha was that he was going to influence the world and bring the entire world closer to God. And that was also Yaakov's mission, and something that he had to live up to as well, something that really was not apropos for Esav. So I think that this whole story, although and on the surface it may sound silly, they're fighting over a bracha, but they understand this is going to set in motion not only Esav and Yaakov, but all the generations to follow. And what is going to be their task in the world as we go through history. And I suggest that it's so important because this establishes that this is our primary goal and our primary purpose. Yes, we can focus, we can certainly pursue Mishmanei Haaretz, the fat of the land, but our first priority is Tal HaShamayim, is the spiritual greatness that we're meant to bring to humanity and to history. It's interesting that Yitzchak at this time is, I think, 137 years old. So Rashi quotes and says that Yitzchak said, "I'm giving this bracha now because I'm old and I don't know when I'll die, and so I want to bless you." But I think the lesson of that is, and he lived for quite a long time afterwards. He didn't die right away, but although in a sense he fades away and Yaakov takes over center stage. But the idea is we shouldn't wait. We should give these brachot constantly to our family, to our children, and we should think about what we want. What is the bracha we're giving them? Yes, there's a bracha of health, there's a bracha of parnasa, and many different wonderful things that we want our children to have. But overall, the bracha is what we want our children to accomplish, and we want to pass that down to them. And in a sense, all of the children, each one is a Bechor, and they each will have their own strengths and their own capabilities, but primarily we want to think when we give this bracha, just as Yitzchak was passing down to his sons, what is it that we want them to focus on and their primary mission in life? And in the end of the day, this is what happened. Yaakov, hopefully, is passing down this tradition for the Jewish people to lead the world in spirituality. And Esav is making sure that the world survives and in a material way, which is also very important. And for the descendants of Esav, that becomes their primary mission. When those missions get reversed and the wires get crossed, that's when we have trouble. So this is, I think, a deeper look into this whole battle over the Bechora and over the bracha. And perhaps it should lead us to give as many brachot as we can to others, but especially to our family, so that they understand what their mission is and what their priorities are in life. So we'll stop here. We can unmute if anybody has a comment or question. Tal, if we can, Tal HaShamayim, if we can unmute there, okay. And if anybody wants to make a comment, feel free to. Tal, can we unmute there? Or you can unmute yourself, I guess, if you have something that you want to add. Anybody want to comment?
I have a comment. I think,
yes.
Or question. What I see that Yaakov did two things. Why? Yaakov saw that the Esav is not really suitable for the position, suitable for responsibility. This is what I understand from the Torah, and this is what I see. So sometimes when we see that there is something's going out of control, we can try to act. So what I see, that's a very brave behavior, very bravery, but I see with Yaakov pure bravery. He understood that he needs to take a step up and he needs to take the control because Esau is completely not suitable. This is what I see, and I really want to hear what you think about the situation.
Well, I think Yaakov has a lot of trepidation. Not only is he scared of Esau, who's much stronger than him, but as he says, Anochi ish chalak, I want to be honest and do this in an honest way. It's a whole other subject, but we see that Yaakov is going to be continually confronted by situations that call into question his honesty and his integrity and his morality. We see this in the story of when his daughter is raped and in Shechem, and the town is wiped out. We see this in his back and forth with Lavan, who tries to cheat him, and how is Yaakov going to deal with that? And in some ways, Yaakov says, I can outwit, says to his wives, Rachel and Leah, after, the brides are switched, he says, well, he's a master of deception, but I can be tricky when I need to be as well. And this is another subject, but Yaakov has to come to grips with combining both his sense of spirituality and morality with living in the real world. And sometimes in the real world, you have to do what you need to do to survive. And that's hard to know how to navigate that course. And in Jewish history, we often have been in situations where we had to survive, and to do that, we sometimes had to, let's say, circumvent laws that the decks were stacked against us. We weren't allowed to go to universities and to be part of guilds and own land and be in government. And we had to find a way to survive. And sometimes, we had to take action in ways that probably in better situations we wouldn't do. And that's a conflict that we are dealing with all the time. And Yaakov dealt with it all his life in trying to reconcile what he had to do and what he felt maybe I should be doing. That was a bit more of the straight and narrow. And it's a long subject, but we have dealt with this really for all of our history. And we hope that we made the right choice, and that we, in the end, will receive God's bracha and God's blessing that says, well, sometimes when life comes first and the ability to survive, but it's not always simple. And this is a perfect example where, although it's more Rivka than it is Yaakov, she pays a price for what she does, because she will, in a sense, die very lonely. Nobody will be at her funeral except the gravedigger, we're told. Her name, Rivka, can be read Rivaka, single or alone. And she pays a price, but she did what she felt needed to be done for the survival of the Jewish people. And it was not without ramifications and without consequences, and she had to live with that. So that's a whole other subject, but it's hopefully partially an answer to your question. So if anybody does not have any other comment or question, I will thank you for tuning in. Next week, same time, same place. Thank you to Tal and Emre for hosting, and everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving and Shabbat Shalom. It's always appropriate to give thanks. So I say thanks to you for joining in and giving me a chance to say a few words. And you should all have bracha, hatzlacha, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov. Chodesh Tov. Thanks for adding that. Chodesh Kislev to everybody. Bye.